Cześć, it's Michalina from Coffee That Gives a Fuck. The coffee is ready, the camera is ready, microphone's ready. This coffee was washed, by the way. If you want to know what that really means, let's talk about the processing methods. You have learned from this video that knowing how your beans were processed is a very important piece of information. But why is it important? What the processing even is? What kind of processing there are? Does it affect the flavor? And if it does, how? Let's talk a little. Honestly, I don't know where I wanted to go. To make it easier for you to understand the definition of processing, I will explain you first when and where the processing happens, and then later what it applies to. So, about where. Let me just show you something. This is the coffee area belt again. Honestly, you've seen this photo so many times that if you still don't know where the coffee grows, then I don't know what else to tell you. All along the coffee area belt, there are thousands and thousands of different plantations, like for example, this one. On each of the plantation, there are many different type of coffee trees, like this one. And no matter what type of trees there are growing on the plantation, they all give fruits, so-called coffee cherries, like these ones. Like any other fruit, really, coffee cherries are ready to be harvested in a very particular time of the year. It's slightly different in each of the country alongside the coffee area belt, but in every country the procedure is very similar. They're all the same principles. Once the coffee was collected from the trees, it is stored in piles somewhere around the plantation. As you saw, the coffee area belt is very much in the middle of the planet, but the coffee most often is consumed far away from where the coffee grows, so it needs to be transported from the coffee origin to the destination where the coffee will be later roasted and consumed. It might take months for coffee to travel from one place to another. If you want to send the coffee halfway through the earth, you have to make sure that the quality of coffee stays on stable level and it's very controllable to roast later on. We need to make sure that the coffee bean that is inside the coffee cherry is taken out of the fruit, out of the pulp, it's cleaned up and then dried out enough to travel for months. And so the way of how we get the bean out of the fruit, out of the cherry, how we clean it, preserve and prepare for the trip that it's about to make is what we call the processing. Coffee cherries, once they've been collected from the trees, are taken to so-called processing stations, and that's where the whole processing happens. Now, about when. Processing needs to start taking place very quickly after the cherries were taken off the trees. Ideally, the coffee is picked from the trees in their peak moment of their sugar texture, flavors development, so it tastes sweet and delicious. No matter what type of trees were cultivated on the plantation, all the fruits do the same. They continue to ripen once they've been taken off the tree, so taking how hot, how humid it might be in the areas or where the coffee grows, it might be a matter of 8 hours and the coffee might start to ferment. If we let the coffee cherries to sit in one spot for longer than couple of hours, the quality of coffee decreases drastically, so the action needs to be fast. Well, depending on what type of method we are talking about. There are two most common ways of processing the coffee. It's either washed method, also so-called wet, and dry method, also called natural. Traditionally, after the coffee was picked from the trees, it would be spread on some kind of patios or raised beds somewhere outside around the processing station, with the fruit still on the bean, and it will be drying out under the sun. When the fruit reaches the desirable level of moisture content, then the machinery help removing the fruit from the bean, and the beans will be cleaned up with some water. There is more other steps later on in the procedure, but what's the most important here is that this process is very, very slow. And the slower the process, the more chances for something to go wrong. If the weather is not favorable, or if the coffee cherries were not systematically rotated, if the fruit was not drying equally around the bean. There could be the fermentation started to happen, or the coffee might experience mold. There's many risks along the way. It might take even up to 6 weeks for the coffee to be ready. But if everything goes right, the coffee tastes amazing. Maybe I say it like that because I am a huge fan of naturals, because of the sweetness that the coffee can give you. Red wine like, dry fruits like flavors, how thick that coffee is, so how heavy the body is. It all is there because of how long the fruit was still attached to the beans of the coffee, and all the juices went into the bean and it made it this fantastic. I mean, who wouldn't like that? And on the other hand, we have washed meated. So that applies to first removing the fruit from the beans and then soaking the beans in water for several hours, then rinsing it with water again and again. And as you can imagine, this process requires lots of water, and I mean a lot of water. This is not necessarily environmentally friendly, just saying. There are countries that don't have this much water, but even if there are regions that have access to this much water, there's so much wastewater that it causes the pollution of an environment. In extreme cases, we might come across so-called eutrophication. I said that correctly in one go. Eutrophication happens when there is so much different type of nutrition in the water that come from the wastewater from the plantation, that harmful organisms like algae thrives in the environment. The algae grows like crazy until it creates the very thick body on the surface of the water. It's very difficult for sun to go through that very thick layer. That causes a damage in water's fauna and flora. Fortunately, there's more and more solutions with the wastewater, filtering the water, reusing the water. Luckily, because the biggest benefit from that method is time. It's a matter of few days and the process is pretty much done, so the farmers can send their coffee and receive their payments much faster than if they applied dry metered. Applying washed metered also allows farmers to achieve very repeatable flavors in the coffee each and every harvest. But for us, the regular coffee drinkers, most important thing is how that coffee tastes. And the coffee is so crisp and clear. The brightness just asks for appreciation. The acidity that it's so fresh in a coffee just explodes in your mouth, and maybe that's my favorite metered. I'm gonna make myself another one. Now, do you have to limit yourself to only those two metered? Nah. With the bigger expectations from customers, with higher coffee professionals' expectations, like baristas who wants to show something totally different on the competitions, with the knowledge of farmers and coffee producers developing each and every year, there's more and more very unusual ideas of what you can do with the coffee in the processing stage. To name a few unusual ways, there is honey. And by the way, it doesn't mean that they add honey to the coffee. There is carbonic maceration or anaerobic, lactic washed, and I could be talking about it for another hour, but don't worry, I won't. I don't know how to explain it. First, because I think that the meteeds are still not as common, so you would probably come across either dry or wet meteed first, and also they are still quite expensive, so probably that wouldn't be your first choice of taking the first steps of discovering specialty coffee. But if you will have a chance to try that coffee, please do, because I still remember the taste of the coffee that was done in carbonic maceration way, and it really does take you to another level of coffee experience. It's really something unique, and that will just even better open your mind for exploring more and more. I wouldn't be myself though if I didn't mention that there are ways of processing the coffees that I personally think that they are a little bit of crossing the line. Like, for example, there is this way of adding cinnamon sticks into the coffee while it's being processed, and yeah, that coffee later on tastes amazing. You can pick up the cinnamon notes very quickly when you taste it, but I'm still contemplating. Stop using words you cannot pronounce. I still am not sure if I don't think that it's the same thing as adding oils to the coffee after it was roasted.
Whoa!
So there is one more aspect of that subject left to be discussed. How knowing different processing methods fits into the matter of comparing commodity coffee to specialty coffee? Well, let's take me back to a few minutes ago. Ideally, the coffee is picked from the trees in their peak moment of their sugar texture, flavors development, so it tastes sweet and delicious. That right there. Being able to pick the coffees from the trees in their peak moments of sugar development is done the best by hand picking. Coffee matures in stages. It's not that one day, bam, all the cherries are ready. If you are a coffee picker, during this harvesting season, you might come across even one branch that has few different stages of maturing the coffee, like this one, for example. So the specialty coffee producers make sure that they hire enough people who, during the harvesting season, are fast enough and also are experienced enough to be able to tell the differences between different stages. Moreover, they need to be able to recognize cherries with some defects. They need to be careful enough not to break any branches. So as you can imagine, this is very time consuming and a lot of workforce requiring process. Most of the farmers cannot afford extra help, but they still need to be fast enough to collect all the coffee cherries before it overripes. They want to have some profit, so they need to be as quick as possible. And if you work on the commercial plantation, if you supply commodity coffee market, nobody really cares about every single bean on the trees this much. There are machinery that speed the process up, like the combines who just right through the plantation. Their machineries shake the tree, so everything falls on the ground. It is very fast process, but if the coffee harvesting is done this way, then you end up having unripe cherries with overripe cherries, with some insect, with damaged cherries, with leaves and branches, and you can tell what I'm getting at, right? So let me leave you today with the simple question that you can probably answer on your own. How many bags of commodity coffee have you come across so far that had an information about the processing method on them? I think that nobody really likes to brag about something if they know that they didn't do the greatest job they could. That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to ask me a question, if you want to leave some feedback, please leave the comments down in the comment section below the video. There is one more video coming about the information on the back of specialty coffees. Later on, there is an experiment on humans coming. Just FYI, and I will be extremely honored if you subscribed to my channel. That way we can reach to more people and we can support the specialty coffee one video at a time. Peace and coffee.